In 1983, one company lost $539 million in 3 months, not a year, 1 quarter. That same year, the entire video game industry collapsed by 97%. These weren't normal failures. They were billion-dollar disasters, and almost all of them were avoidable. Today, we're counting down the 10 biggest tech failures of the 1980s, ranked by how much money they destroyed. Number 1 didn't just fail. It ended with truckloads buried in the desert. Let's start with number 10. In 1981, Adam Osborne launched the world's first commercially successful portable computer. It weighed 24 pounds. It had a 5-inch screen. It sold for $1,795, including software. By 1982, Osborne Computer was generating $10 million in monthly revenue, and it was the fastest-growing private company in American history. Then Adam Osborne opened his mouth. In early 1983, he announced the next generation Osborne before it was ready to ship. Customers stopped buying the Osborne 1, waiting for the upgrade. Revenue collapsed overnight. The company could not pay suppliers, could not pay staff, and it filed for bankruptcy that September. Losses exceeded $40 million. Business schools named the phenomenon the Osborne effect, and it was taught to every product manager 40 years later. 40 million is rough. The next entry sank a British computing legend. Sir Clive Sinclair had given Britain affordable computing with the ZX Spectrum. In 1984, he announced the Sinclair QL, a professional 32-bit machine for business users, priced under £500. The promise was revolutionary. The execution was a disaster. The QL shipped months late. Early units arrived with an unfinished operating system on a dongle hanging out of the back. The custom microdrives were unreliable. Reviewers were brutal. Business buyers refused to touch it. Combined losses across the QL and the failed C5 electric trike pushed Sinclair Research into collapse. By 1986, Sir Clive sold his computer business to Amstrad for £5 million, less than half of what he had burned. Total damage exceeded £100 million in today's money. Sinclair lost his company. Next, an industry rewrote its playbook. In 1980, Apple needed a business computer to compete with IBM. The Apple III launched at $4,340 with one fatal flaw. Apple's leadership shipped it without a cooling fan, prioritizing silence over thermal engineering. The Apple III overheated constantly. Chips popped out of their sockets. Floppy disks warped. Apple's official solution was, genuinely, to lift the computer 2 inches off the desk and drop it to reseat the chips. The first 14,000 units were recalled. Apple's credibility with corporate buyers was destroyed for years. Apple wrote off $60 million and handed the business market to IBM. The damage was so severe that Apple bet its future on a different product line, returning at number 4. 60 million is painful. The next entry destroyed a company that was beating Atari months earlier. Coleco was beating Atari head-to-head with the ColecoVision. Management decided to expand into computers. The Atom launched in 1983 at under $700, complete with a printer. The execution was a catastrophe. Roughly 60% of units shipped defective. The entire system powered through the printer, so a printer failure killed everything. Worst of all, the Atom emitted a magnetic pulse on startup, powerful enough to erase any data tape sitting nearby, including the software cassettes. Coleco posted a $258 million loss in 1984, filed for bankruptcy in 1988, and was sold to Hasbro for parts. Atom is still cited as one of the worst conceived consumer electronics launches in history. Coleco failed quickly. The next product humiliated one of the biggest companies on earth. In 1984, IBM, the most powerful tech company in the world, entered the home market. The PC Junior launched at $1,300 and was supposed to crush Apple and Commodore. It was destroyed on arrival. The chiclet keyboard was so bad, reviewers refused to type on it. Software compatibility with the regular IBM PC was broken in subtle ways that confused buyers. The price was higher than competitors that worked better. IBM pulled the PC Junior in March 1985 after 14 months. Direct losses exceeded $40 million, with several hundred million more in damaged brand equity. For IBM, the dollar figure mattered less than the humiliation. The corporation that defined business computing had been beaten by Commodore and Apple in a market it should have owned. IBM lost face. The next entry lost the future. In 1983, Apple launched the Lisa, the first mass-market PC with a graphical user interface. It cost $9,995, roughly $30,000 in today's money. The Lisa should have changed computing. Instead, Apple sabotaged it from the inside. A rival team inside Apple was quietly building a parallel project, Macintosh. When the Macintosh launched in January 1984, it did everything the Lisa did, ran on cheaper hardware, and cost a quarter of the price. Apple's own marketing destroyed its own flagship. Apple wrote off roughly $50 million. Then came the part that became legend. In September 1989, Apple loaded approximately 2,700 unsold Lisa units onto trucks and buried them in a Logan, Utah landfill for a tax write-off. Apple buried its future. The next entry burned over $1 billion. Betamax was better. Cleaner picture, better build quality. First to market by almost 2 years. By every engineering measure, Sony had won the home video format war before VHS launched. Then Sony made the decision that destroyed them. Sony refused to openly license Betamax. JVC licensed VHS to everyone. By 1984, Sony was alone, while RCA, Panasonic, Hitachi, and Sharp were all selling VHS machines. Hollywood chose VHSs. Rental stores chose VHS. Consumers followed. Losses reached $1 billion to $1.5 billion in unrealized revenue before strategic damage. Sony spent the next decade reactive, and that hesitation later cost them the digital music war, which Apple won. The lesson: technical superiority cannot beat licensing strategy. Sony lost over $1 billion. The next entry crippled an American corporation. The Radio Corporation of America spent 17 years developing the SelectaVision video disc system. They launched it in 1981. They killed it in 1984. The technology was strange. SelectaVision used a stylus, like a record player, to read video off a vinyl-like disc. It looked futuristic in 1972. By 1981, it was obsolete because VHS and Betamax had launched in 1976, and they could record. SelectaVision could only play. Documented losses reached roughly $580 million, about $1.8 billion today. The damage crippled RCA's position. General Electric acquired the company in 1986 and broke it up for parts. The RCA brand, which had defined American consumer electronics for 50 years, became a license plate on imported televisions. RCA lost the company. Next, a semiconductor giant fell to its knees. In 1981, Texas Instruments was the most powerful semiconductor company in the world. They invented the integrated circuit. They pioneered handheld calculators. They were untouchable. So when TI entered home computers with the TI 994A, the assumption was simple. TI would crush everyone. Then Commodore declared war. Jack Tramiel, Commodore's chief executive officer, started a deliberate price war to bleed competitors to death. The VIC-20 dropped to under $300, then under $200. TI slashed the TI 994A from over $1,000 to under $100. Every unit sold became a guaranteed loss. It got worse. TI had locked the machine to proprietary cartridges, refusing third-party software. The software library starved. Buyers chose Commodore. In 1983, TI reported a $660 million loss on the home computer division, one of the largest corporate losses in tech history at that point. TI exited the consumer market in October 1983 and never returned. The giant that had invented the chips powering its rivals had been humiliated in a market it should have owned. TI lost the home computer market. The next entry destroyed an entire industry. The Atari 5200 launched in November 1982 as Atari's next-generation flagship. Within 12 months, it was over, and it took the American video game industry with it. The 5200 was incompatible with 2,600 cartridges, despite Atari's massive existing library. The controllers were notoriously unreliable. Meanwhile, the 2600 was flooded with garbage titles, and Atari shipped 2 of the worst games ever. The Pac-Man port looked nothing like the arcade. The E.T. game, developed in 5 weeks to hit the 1982 holidays, was unplayable. In the second quarter of 1983, Warner Communications reported Atari had lost $539 million in 3 months. Warner stock crashed 32% in a single day. The American video game industry collapsed from $3.2 billion in annual revenue to roughly $100 million, a 97% contraction in 12 months. In September 1983, Atari secretly sent 14 truckloads of unsold ET cartridges to a landfill in Alamogordo, New Mexico, and buried them under concrete. The story was treated as an urban legend for 30 years, until a 2014 excavation confirmed every detail. Cumulative damage exceeded $3 billion in 1983, roughly $9 billion today. It was the largest entertainment industry collapse in history. And there you have it. If these billion-dollar tech history disasters opened your eyes, hit subscribe, because the next video might save you from making the same mistake in the future.